Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Maseches Beitza Daf Tes begins with a new Mishnah, which introduces another machlokas, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and the Gemara will discuss at length some of the details and how they could affect that machlokas. So, let's begin the machlokas. This time, Beis Hillel is the one who was lenient, as usually is the situation. The machlokas surrounds the topic of maras ayin. When you do something that looks to somebody else like you're doing an isser, or like it's evident that you have done an isser, is that permitted or is it not permitted? The question here is about moving a ladder to a pigeon coop. That's a pigeon coop that you own, and the birds are wild birds. They don't belong to you, although they're staying in your pigeon coop. But you usually go there to get some birds to slaughter so that you can have some food for Yontif. So you want to do this on Yontif. You want to take the ladder to the pigeon coop to get some birds to shecht on Yontif. The problem is, if somebody sees you moving a ladder, he thinks you're going to work on the roof. That's what people usually move ladders for. So are you allowed to or are you not allowed to? So there are a number of variables involved. Question number one is, where are you? Are you in Rosh Hashanah or are you in Rosh Hashanah? Are you in a public place or a non-public place? The Mishnah doesn't discuss that. The Gemara discusses that. The question that the Mishnah refers to is, where are you moving it from or to? And here we have four possibilities. Are you moving it from nowhere to the pigeon coop? Are you moving it from one pigeon coop to the next pigeon coop? Are you moving it back from the pigeon coop to storage, to nowhere? Or is it at the pigeon coop and you're just tilting it from one ladder, from one hole, from one nesting hole to another nesting hole? Now, another question to be discussed later in the Gemara is, what type of ladder are you holding? There is a ladder that's specific for climbing onto the roof, and then there's a ladder that's specific for accessing the birds from a pigeon coop. And the last thing to discuss is, what kind of motion are you moving this ladder? Are you actually carrying it? Are you tilting it in one place? Or are you walking it, edging it along the ground one corner at a time? So let's begin the Mishnah specifically. The Mishnah says two cases. One is where you are tilting the ladder from hole to hole, from a pigeonhole to another pigeonhole. That, everybody agrees, says the Mishnah, is mutter. Nobody's going to think that you are carrying a ladder because you're working on the roof. Now, the machlokas is in the case where you are carrying it from one shovach, from one pigeon coop to another pigeon coop. That's the specific case the Mishnah discusses. We'll see a brisa which spells out more of the cases as to where you are traveling, where you're carrying from one to. But where you're carrying from one pigeon coop to another pigeon coop, there Beis Shammai says it's usher because it looks like you're carrying the ladder to work on the roof. Somebody will think you're working on the roof. And Beis Hillel says it's mutter because you don't have that concern. So the Gemara discusses why. What exactly is this machlokas? Why don't you have that concern? So the first attempt, the Gemara's first version, is of Chanan bar Ami, and he says that the machlokas between the two of them is only in a Rishos Harabim, and the question is, what will people think when people see you? Will they be concerned or not? Will they assume that you're carrying it to work on the roof or not? However, if you're carrying it in a Rishos Hayachid, private domain where nobody sees you, you can do whatever you want because nobody will see you, and therefore there's no concern that somebody will think that you did an Isser. So Gemara asks, but how is this possible? We have a rule that whenever something is usher because of maras ayin, you're not allowed to do it even when nobody's looking. Now, this is a statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. Anytime the Chachamim assered something because it looks like you're doing an Isser, it's forbidden even if nobody's seeing. Even b'chadri chadarim, the Gemara says. So how could Rav Chanan bar Ami say there's a difference if people are seeing or not? It makes no difference. If it looks like it's a problem, so then even if nobody's looking, it's usher. Now, that was a statement of Rav, but Rav is generally somebody you can't argue with if you're an Amora, because Rav was the Rebbe of almost all Amoraim who came afterwards. He was one of the earliest Amoraim, as Rashi explains. So the Gemara says, because this is a machlokas, this concept of is maras ayin, is something which looks like an isser, forbidden, if nobody's looking, if it's in private area, in chadri chadarim, does it apply there? It's not. That is a machlokas tanoim, and therefore Rav holds like the Tana that says it is a problem, and here Rav Chanan Brahmi holds like the Tana says it's not a problem, and therefore he says that there's no Machlokas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai where nobody's looking. The Gemara quotes the Machlokas Tanaim. Here Machlokas is about somebody who walked in the river, and now his clothing is wet, and he wants to hang it out to dry. Problem is when he hangs it out to dry, it looks like he just washed it. So is he allowed to hang it out to dry? So if people are seeing, it's for sure usher. To spread it in public where others can see, that's for sure usher. People will see it spread out to dry, they'll assume you washed it. In private, where nobody could see, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon against the Tanakama. Tanakama says it's mutter, and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon say it's asur. So there you have that machlokes. Okay, so therefore we have our first version of the machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The question is, what will people think when they see? And if nobody's looking, there's no machlokes. Second version, and this is also attributable as another version of what Rav Chanan Bar Ami said, is that the machlokes is only in Rishos Hayachid, and it's exactly over this point. In Rishos Harabim, it's definitely a problem. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agree that somebody's going to see is going to think that you're carrying it because you want to work on the roof. The question is, are you allowed to do something which is marasayan in private if it's in your own private quarters where nobody can see? And it's exactly over that point that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are arguing. So Gemara says, but according to that, it comes out that what Rav said, that such a thing is usher, that even in private quarters you can't do something that's marasayan, he's saying like Beis Shammai. Because Beis Shammai is the one who said that this is usher, and the way we're explaining this machlokes now is that Beis Shammai says it's usher in Rishos Hayachid because you can't do marasayan even in Rishos Hayachid, and Beis Hillel says it's mutter because they say you could do marasayan in Rishos Hayachid. So according to that, Rav is saying like Beis Shammai. It can't be that Rav saying like Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai is not the halacha. Somebody who's saying the pshat that means Rav says like Beis Shammai is as good as arguing with Rav. So Gemara says, no, again, it's going to be a machlokes tanaim. The Rav will say that this is not, the machlokes tanaim is not over, the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is not about this inyan. The machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is exactly the machlokes between Rav Shimon and Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Shimon and Rabbi Eliezer will argue as to what Beis Hillel holds, meaning as follows. Rav will tell you, I don't say like Beis Shammai. I say like the version of Beis Hillel of the Tanakama who argues on Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon. The Tanakama, which we quoted earlier, about spreading the clothing out in public, where they argue as to whether or not you're allowed to do that, they're arguing as to what Beis Hillel holds. Our Mishnah goes with the opinion that Beis Hillel holds that such a thing is mutter, and Beis Shammai holds that such a thing is usher. According to the other Tana, which will be the Tana in this Mishnah of spreading, Beis Hillel actually hold that that's usher, and that's what Rav is holding like. Rav is holding like that Tana who learns Beis Hillel that way. Okay, that concludes the Gemara's explanation of what this machlokes is about. Now the Gemara is going to introduce a brisa, which has a different version of this Mishnah, of this machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, and it'll have a bunch of opinions which will introduce some of the other variables which we discussed in the introduction to this shir. So the brisa says as follows. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai both agree that you're allowed to carry the ladder from one pigeon coop to another pigeon coop. That is not the problem. Meaning here we're discussing the variable of place. What place to place. In our Mishnah we said from pigeon coop to pigeon coop is where that machlokes is. This version says, where Shimon ben Elazar says, from pigeon coop to pigeon coop is not a problem. Where's the machlokes? The actual machlokes is bringing it back from pigeon coops to storage. There, if somebody sees you, he sees you carrying it to your house. So it looks like you're carrying a ladder to go work on your roof. So this is different than our version, and it establishes that the whole machlokes is in a case where it's from coop to your house, not between pigeon coops. What will be if it's from storage to the pigeon coop? This Mishnah doesn't, this brisa doesn't specify. The Gemara will get into that later. Now, the next thing the brisa says is what type of ladder are we referring to? Rav Yehuda says this machlokes is only if it is a pigeon coop ladder, a particular ladder that's recognizable that it looks like a pigeon coop, there Beis Shammai say it's aser and Beis Hillel say it's mutter. However, if it's a roof ladder, there even Beis Hillel would say it's aser because somebody sees you schlepping a roof ladder, he's going to assume you're climbing on the roof to fix the roof. The next discussion, the next variable, is what type of movement is this? So Rabbi Daisa says if you're tilting it from pigeonhole to pigeonhole, that's permitted. And then there's Acherim who say in the name of Rabbi Daisa you're even allowed to walk the ladder from pigeonhole to pigeonhole. The only thing that's usher is carrying. Okay, so we have here discussed the variables all together. Where are you carrying it? From what to what? What type of ladder? And what type of motion? Carrying, walking, or leaning. Now, the Gemara has an incident with the sons of Reb Chia, and the Gemara is going to show that they learned this brisa somewhat differently than Reb Chia himself. The Gemara says that the sons of Reb Chia went out to see the village, they went to see the sights, and they came back, and their father said, did any halacha question come to you that you gave a psak on? So they said, yes, the question came to us about somebody who wanted to bring a roof ladder to take pigeons from a pigeon coop. And we said that it's mutter. We said it's permitted to take the roof ladder. So the father said, how could you say it's permitted to take the roof ladder? It's aser. You have to go back and say that your psak is wrong. It's aser. The brisa clearly shows Rabbi Yehuda says that it's aser. So Gemara explains that his sons, the Bnei Rabbi Chia, thought that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that it's aser, and the Tanna Kama didn't comment on the roof ladder. That means that the Tanna Kama makes no differentiation. The Tanna Kama just says, he doesn't specify the ladder. That means he holds any ladder is okay, and the halacha would be like the Tanna Kama over Rabbi Yehuda. But it's not correct. Rabbi Yehuda is saying something which the Tanna Kama didn't get into. He's explaining that the Tanna Kama's opinion. The Tanna Kama discussed where you're moving it from what to what. On that, Rabbi Yehuda said that this is all true in a pigeon ladder. It's not true on a roof ladder, and therefore there is no machokas, and Rabbi Yehuda is according to all opinions, and it's incorrect to say that you're allowed to carry the roof ladder from anywhere to anywhere. Now there's another version of this whole story with the Bnei Reb Chia, and when the father came back and asked them, what did you hear? What did you say? So they gave a different psak. This psak is one step later in the Mishnah. It's also concerning a roof ladder, but it's somebody who wanted to lean the roof ladder from one pigeonhole to another pigeonhole. He didn't want to carry it. So they said it's mutter because they understood that when Rabbi Daisa came along and said it's permitted to lean from one pigeonhole to another pigeonhole, he was referring to Rabbi Yehuda's case. He was referring to Rabbi Yehuda's case where he said that it's aser, and Rabbi Daisa is saying that which you said is aser, you're allowed to do if you're just leaning it. So that roof ladder, you said you're not allowed to move. If you're just leaning it, it's okay. And therefore, this guy was just trying to lean it from hole to hole, so they said it's okay. And that Rabbi Chia said to him, it's not correct. Rabbi Daisa was commenting on the case which was permitted. He was limiting the heter. He wasn't limiting the isser, he was limiting the heter. In the case of a roof ladder, it's always aser even to lean it from hole to hole. In the case of a pigeon ladder, there you're permitted to lean it only from hole to hole and not to carry it from shovach to shovach. That is what Rabbi Dosa's limiting factor was. Okay, now the Gemara moves on from this, and the Gemara has a question here that why here is Beis Hillel lenient and Beis Shammai is strict. Beis Hillel says it's permitted and Beis Shammai is machmer. The Gemara's assumption is that the issue at the core of this is Simchas Yontif. You need a bird, you need to be able to have meat for Yom Tov. And Beis Hillel here are being lenient because they're concerned that people should be able to have meat for Yom Tov. And Beis Shammai aren't concerned about that. They say, no, we'd rather be strict, even at the expense of Simchas Yom Tov. The Gemara says that doesn't fit with what we said earlier in our previous Mishnah about whether or not you're allowed to slaughter an animal if you don't have blood to cover the dirt. You're allowed to slaughter a bird or a chai if you don't have dirt to cover the blood. According to in that situation, Beis Hillel said, don't slaughter it. Simchas Yontif is very nice, but you can't slaughter it if you can't cover the blood. And Beis Shammai said, no, you're allowed to. So you have a contradiction as to whether or not we allow you to do things for Simchas Yontif that are not 100% l'chatchila. So Gemara says the two are contradicting each other. This is a question the Gemara asks, and based on that, the Gemara says, Rav Yochanan says you have to flip the opinions here, and Beis Hillel is the one that asers, and Beis Shammai is the one that maters. So the Gemara says, what? Why should you flip the opinions? It's two different questions. The issue here is not about is Simchas Yontif important or is Simchas Yontif not important. The issue is there an actual concern in each case? In the case of the slaughtering, as we said in the sugya there, where talking about where you have a spade already stuck in earth. And the question was, are we afraid you're going to come to crumble up earth and do an Isra of Ketisha? And there's a machlokes between Yisrael and Beis Shammai. Is there such a concern or not? Here the concern is something else. The concern is, will somebody see you and assume that you're fixing your roof? Those are the issues. Is this a valid concern or not? The issue has nothing to do with Simchas Yontif, and therefore there's no contradiction. So the Gemara says, okay. Then we have to come up with a new explanation of what was Rav Yochanan referring to when he said switch the shita, switch the opinions around. So Gemara says it's referring to a different machlokes. Machlokes as to whether or not you have to identify which of the pigeons you plan to take before Yom Tov specifically by verbally identifying them, or if you have to actually pick them up and handle them. According to Beis Hillel, you just have to say, I'm going to take that pigeon and that pigeon. According to Beis Shammai, before Yom Tov, you have to pick up the pigeon and hold it. You have to go up the ladder, pick up the pigeon and hold it. What's the reason you have to do anything? It's muktzah. A wild bird is a muktzah bird. You have to set it aside as being the bird that you want. Otherwise, it's muktzah. And by setting it aside, you make it mentally prepared, and therefore it's mukhan, and therefore it's not muktzah. Now, according to Beis Shammai, we're afraid that if you just verbally identified when you pick it up, you can have mercy on it. You can decide, I should shach this cute little bird. I'm not going to. And therefore, it ends up that all the work you did, dragging the ladder, climbing up, all that, was done for nothing. You did extra tirchan yontif. We don't want you to do that. Therefore, you have to handle it before yontif. Once you did that, you're not going to change your mind. So here again, the Gemara says this seems to contradict the discussion about covering the blood. There, Beis Hillel was machmer. Here, Beis Shammai is machmer. Contradiction. Are we afraid for Simchas Yontif? Who is more lenient on Simchas Yontif, Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai? The Gemara says again, this is not related. Here again, it's different concerns. I could say the same thing, even that as far as the spade stuck in the ground, is there a concern of crumbling? Beis Hillel says yes. Beis Shammai says no. Here, as far as afraid of, are you going to change your mind? Beis Hillel says you're not going to change your mind. Beis Shammai says you are. So the Gemara has to look for more explanations, and we shall pick up that discussion on Daf Yud.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.